Good evening, and thank you for attending another of Little City's virtual town halls. I am Tina Marasini, the Director of Communications at Little City. Tonight, not only am I joined by our Executive Director, Sean Jeffers, but I am pleased to welcome Wendy Mayfield, Director of Day Services, who is known well to all of our Countryside families. In this evening's town hall, we are dedicating the next hour to exclusively address the current status of our Countryside Center and Community Day Services program. Without question, this program has endured a severe impact as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that each of you are tuning in because of your concern. Wendy and Sean will be addressing the current facts as well as the possible and probable future of Countryside. At our most recent town hall in November, Sean stated that Countryside program is in fact in a precarious situation. We have been hit with a devastating loss in revenue, one that multiplies each day seats remain vacant. Since the program reopened in September, only a small fraction of Countryside participants have been able to return. First and foremost, we recognize the fear and concerns families may have regarding the safety of their loved one. We know that their absence is due to an abundance of caution as the pandemic has devastated the country and our community. And most importantly, we know the value and significance that the Countryside Day Services programs brings to our families and participants. This program is an essential part of the lives for those who depend on it, and it is a lifeline in every sense of the word. While no one can foresee exactly how the future will play out, we confidently believe that the look and feel of our CDS program will be different post-pandemic. Wendy will have the opportunity to share how efforts are being made to define new ways of providing individuals with the needed supports and services in the best possible environment. Little City's Chief Development Officer, Jane Drew, is also here fielding questions as they come in. So please utilize the live event Q&A to submit any questions or comments you may have. Sean, I will begin with you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to our Countryside families. I know you would like to welcome Wendy, and do you have any opening comments?
Well, I do, Tina, and to all that are on this call, I do thank you for taking time from your busy evenings, particularly this being a holiday season, to tune in. And one of your peers, your friend, Sue Bennis, wrote me a letter a couple weeks ago, and she had listened in on the town halls and I think very accurately conveyed and portrayed the concerns of the families. You know, my intent tonight is to be, as always, is to be transparent, open, but also at the same time encourage you to share ideas. We're at a situation that none of us could have predicted a year ago. I shared on another call that we did on that contrast in my own life relative to what I was worried about 12 months ago and what those concerns and worries are now. 12 months ago, there was optimism about a trip that we were going to take and family that we were going to reconnect with. And now there's a much different profile. As Tina shared, February of this year, there was this rumbling about COVID. None of us really knew what it was or how to prepare. And our initial thoughts was it was going to be something that just blew through like inclement weather, that, you know, we'll deal with it for a short period and then get back to the business of our lives. I think from a human service perspective, and I applaud this governor for his courageousness in saying that he was going to cast a safety net over the scope of the human service sector. And what he basically said is for the duration of this, we didn't even think we're calling it a pandemic at that point, but for the duration of this challenge, agencies like Little City would be made whole, meaning that he did not want any disruption of the work that we were doing, recognizing that he was ordering people to shelter in place. We all thought that that would be for a matter of weeks. Later, we thought come July that would change and that we'd be in a better place. And as the effects of the pandemic began to loom, you began to hear the whispers around that the support that the state was providing to keep our programs open was going to cease. September of this year, that happened. Now, where we were fortunate, why we didn't do some things immediately, there was also the PPP funds and some other CARE Act monies that allowed us to still hold on a little bit longer in anticipation that people would soon be coming back. We face a reality tonight, Tina, where, as you know, and we all on this call know, there is uncertainty. We recognize and we have a responsibility for the mission of Little City and the people that it cares for to make sure that we are the best financial stewards of the resources. Looking at the revenue expense perspective, we've got a program that each day, and it's not the cause or the fault of anyone on this call. It's just the reality that we face. I'm sure each of us in our own lives have been infected in some way by the pandemic, or we know people whose jobs have been lost, whose homes have been lost. And so this pandemic has some financial, emotional, personal effects that are pretty traumatized. So that, Tina, tonight is what I really want to delve into and address the questions and concerns that the families have. I do want to put a caveat on that, and I share this with most people I talk to who said that they can't wait to get back to normal. I'm not the wise person who can look out and predict what the world's going to look like in the future, but I do, with some degree of reasonable certainty, recognize that the model that we have used to provide day services, not only at Little City, but across this state system, is never going to go back to what it was for a variety of reasons. You know, this pandemic was the perfect storm for the state of Illinois to begin to move forth on the 14C sheltered workshop issue, the size of centers like ours. And so as we come out of the pandemic, either the requirements of or limitations on sizes of groups and number of occupants, we have to come up with a different way of providing a meaningful day to the people we serve. So if anyone's holding off for that moment when all the buses will pull off and everyone would get off and go to their respective stations, that's, Tina, unfortunately, is not going to happen. And so I want to talk tonight, and Wendy's going to add to that, the things that we're trying to address that make it possible for people to come back safely, appropriately, and benefit from the services that we offer.
Thank you, Sean, for setting the tone. And I think that everybody listening here understands that it's certainly going to look very different than the program looked earlier this year, even though it's quite a bit longer than we initially anticipated. And as I mentioned earlier, and as you mentioned, we're very happy to have Wendy here to answer some questions that came in directly from our Countryside families, those families that know Wendy so well. So Wendy, I would like to begin addressing those questions that came in through the survey that we sent out. And as we stated, we know that the future programming of Countryside, just like Sean said, will in fact look very different. But Judy specifically wants to know, once the vaccines are available to the public, and if the clients and staff take it, isn't it possible that the Countryside Center might return to its normal working environment? Wendy, obviously Sean set the tone for that and introduced reasonings for that, but can you also speak to why it's not going to look like it did before, even after a vaccine?
Certainly, Tina, and thank you. Right now since our reopening, we've been under restrictions. So we've been under restrictions about size and capacity, number of people in a room, number of people in an area, how many feet between everyone. And what we've learned from that in a positive sense is that the quality of our program increases as that ratio decreases. That is one thing we would like to continue seeing forward with the changes. We've also learned in so many sectors aside from our own that big groups of people shouldn't be in that same proximity at this point. I can also tell you that the positive things that we have done will continue, and the service model that we're proposing, which we'll discuss at more length, does still cover those areas of what our families, what our participants have come to us for all this time. We're just going to do it in a different setting as far as number of people in a group, how many people are, maximum are in a setting. It may come from how we deliver our business as far as hours of availability. One thing that we've seen with people coming back is some are very satisfied at half days. Some are coming part-time that used to come full-time. People's lives have changed outside of this day program, and we will continue to see that modification and change, I think, even going forward after the vaccine. The other thing that we have learned is that not everyone was ready to come back. Not everyone was ready to make those changes with us, or the things that we've done under restriction didn't satisfy some of the needs. So while we'll reintroduce some of those elements that we had, it won't be in the same capacity. Maybe some people will only come part of the week. Maybe some people will come later in the day. So those are the kinds of changes that I would expect to see the new version of normal.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That is certainly understandable. And really kind of continuing your thoughts there, a very similar question came in from Sue. And she is asking that, would your revamped service delivery model include features that so many of the clients enjoyed about Countryside? So Wendy, would you be able to specifically address any parts of the Countryside program that are more likely to return and when, or is it perhaps too soon to really pinpoint that?
So in some respect, it's going to depend on the number of people who return. Once restrictions lessen, our plan is not to completely separate from what we have put in place now, but to make sure that we're still getting those enhancements, but offering it in different ways. So our service delivery model that we intend to introduce is just chunks of what we already do. We're going to be programming specifically to those interests. So earn, which is affecting the work question. Learn, which is some of the things that we've been doing over the past several years, catching the interest and enriching the hobbies or goals and needs of individuals served. Create, we've got that going on right now in what we're doing in our restricted setting. And then recreate. So everybody enjoys wellness, fitness, recreation, activities, outings. Those are components that we've been following all along. So we don't intend for those things to be stripped away. They will just be presented in a different menu of services, if you will, which is what we've been slowly getting to. This has just forced us to really look at how to make those changes for more individuals.
Thank you. Very understandable. I appreciate your very thorough answer. And this next question is also quite specific, and I'm going to address this one to Sean. It provides the opportunity for you, Sean, to comment on your, when you mentioned last month that Countryside was in the red. So a Countryside family member would like to know, how long can Countryside actually operate before it has to close?
So it's a difficult question to answer because what we're assuming, with that, and I don't want to dance around it, at this point, we are operating Countryside with a 100% of the expense and less than a third of the revenue. So every month, every day, as you mentioned, Tina, there's a burn. And it's for as long as we're willing to risk the entire enterprise of Little City. And so we have a fiduciary responsibility to come back and stop the bleed. Okay, so it's not that there's this countryside budget that's set aside. Countryside is a part of the Little City budget. Little City's ability to hold itself is contingent upon the performance of each of its legs. And in this instance, the countryside portion of our budget is draining the rest of the organization. So it places all of what we do at risk. And as I shared before, for the past 60 days, we've made a conscious choice to try to sustain it. But that was following, and Wendy can kind of attest, every day she's getting hit with the census question. When are people coming back? How many people are coming back? Because that information gives us the ability to argue, why are we still holding on? And so one of the goals, Tina, tonight for me is to get that sense from the people who are there. What can we do to get them back? When might they consider getting back? Because we have to make that ultimate decision about the future of this program and the organization. Do we take that center and put it to a different use? It's a very good asset. You know, what I've thought about quite a bit in leading to this is how some things are circular. When both Countryside and Little City were built or came about, it was because people sat at home with nothing to do. And that was the whole objective, that we wanted to create for people separate organizations at that time, but with a common cause of getting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in a rhythm of life that added meaningfulness to their day. And we want to preserve that, Tina, for as long as we can. But we can't do that without the resources, without the people. And if it means we have to configure it differently, that we've got to look at small satellite centers near where people live, we've got to get a good sense from our stakeholders at Countryside. What are the conditions by which they would be motivated to get their loving person out of the house and back into some healthier rhythm of life? And so that's kind of the notion. We're already on borrowed time in terms of the asset loss for Little City, the revenue loss. So there isn't a drop dead date. It is one of where we go back to our board and report, given what we know, here's what we project to be the future. I don't see the center closing. I see it being used differently.
Thank you, Sean. It seems like there's definitely a lot of moving parts. There's not a one size fits all answer, but what I really appreciate the program doing right now is, like Wendy said in the beginning, is analyzing what's working, what's not working, given spacing, what we can anticipate with participants coming back and whatnot. So it's, unfortunately, we are on a sort of deadline in the sense that every day is really devastating financially, but we're at least putting those things into place that have been working well. And we know that things are going to change. So with that being said, everybody knows it's going to look different, and we're just going to figure out the best way that the program is going to work for those who take part in it. So thank you. And
can I just add just one thing? And I not to go out, but just what a thought that's there. And Wendy and I earlier today were in a meeting, group meeting, and she can share some of the things that they discussed by way of future. And I made I'll just say it's a provocative statement, but I believe this, and it isn't, etched in writing, but my belief is that the state of Illinois as a government entity does not, I'm going to say this, does not really care about the future of CDS, of day services. Because right now, the folks who are on this call have their loved ones at home at no expense to the government. And so there's no motivation on the part of governments to have people come back. We argue on the basis of quality of life. That's the reason. And so, as there's not going to be a push from government to bail it out. It did it the first round. And so whatever we do is going to be contingent on the advocacy of the families who are on this call. Because right now, CDS is not a concern of the Department of Human Services. Residential services, that's different because there's a different responsibility. And so the state pays 50% of the cost for a day service. They're not paying. They're announcing a $700 million deficit. And so that's why our interest is not about the money that Little City will lose. It's about the quality of life that people for over 100 years have fought to achieve. That's what's at risk right now. And so we don't want to see that forfeited after so much hard work that was brought about to make it come about.
Right, agree. And as you mentioned, when Little City and Countryside first came about over 60 years ago, both of our organizations, it was for that reason, to provide a meaningful day, and that need has not gone away. So we need the advocacy, and we need everybody to really come together, because it's obviously very important to everybody we serve, and that will always be the case. So Jane, like I mentioned, Jane will be fielding questions through our live event Q&A. So I still encourage everyone here, if anything comes up, to submit a question. So I am going to ask Jane if anything has come through that you would like to pose to Wendy or Sean.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the questions. We had a pre-prepared question right here. We're going to get back to that later. As you could imagine, there's been a lot of questions already from what Sean has said. So there seems to be 2 or 3 main themes around it. And I'll ask Sean first. Earlier, you were talking about CDS being in the red, and someone did ask, well, what are the other areas of Little City? Are they in the red? Are they in the same position as CDS is, or does CDS stand alone in that regard?
I'll kind of walk through. Foster care adoption, unfortunately, and this is where there's the good news and the bad news. This pandemic is forcing families to place more kids in care. It's an unfortunate byproduct of the pandemic, is the stresses and strains it is placing on a child welfare system is pretty intense, and some families are being destroyed, and thus kids are going to care. So foster care adoption is really booming. That's again it's a terrible byproduct. The children's services, because they're entitlement based, they're in the black substantially. School, residential, in the black. So all things child related are doing substantially better because of the entitlement nature of what they do. On our adult residential side, there is a census problem. That census problem is more related to inability to find staff, which is cutting into the occupancy of some of our group homes. So they're struggling to stay on, and we're in discussions now about, there's a double edge there. We need to get the staff to staff the homes so that the people can be admitted to, 1, hopefully get a better life, but 2, to make that program more sustainable. So they're in a little trouble, but not at the same degree as CDS. So CDS, just by way of, I don't know if we'll show the chart or I'll just reference it. I asked our team to show November of last year what our census was, and November of this year. And we're looking at Jess, I don't know if it's possible to pop it up, but. All right, I'll talk until she does, but we'll look at, so when we look at the Countryside Center, our program, Mount St. Joe, I get it's Joe or Mary. I get my names mixed up there, but nonetheless, they're not coming. So here's the chart. Hopefully, the folks on the who are watching this visually can. Those who are on the phone will kind of walk through. So this is showing November 19, meaning 2019, and then also showing November 2020. And 31U, to a great extent, represents the Countryside program. And what we saw there is from right before the pandemic was formally announced, 241 people. Less than 9 months later, 10 months later, down to 37. That's a huge drop. So to the person who's asking the question, none of our programs have experienced that degree of decline by way of revenue and the like. And now what we've done over that period of time is we made a commitment to try and hang on to the staff, not have a staff impact. So less than a third of our people have come back. 2/3 or so out, or 3/4, we'll get the math right there, but that's the degree of impact on the Countryside program. Lakeside, similar, but there's a whole different dynamic at Lakeside that doesn't make it as impactful. But when you bring the two together, Lakeside and Countryside, 437 down to 197. None of our programs have experienced that degree of loss.
And there is sort of related, and maybe Wendy can answer this, is, given all of this, there was another question is, does online program count as services that the state would pay for to, rather than coming in person? What about the online training and the virtual training opportunities?
There is a new virtual day service delivery mode that was just released. The difference in what we can do with it is the reimbursement rate is less than half, and it's very restrictive as far as how many. So you can serve 10 people at a time. A maximum, the maximum number of hours per month is low. I think it's 10 hours per week. So there is a potential for it, but it doesn't replace revenue as well. It's a great alternative for individuals who are not ready to return, and it is something that we just started pursuing virtually for employee development services. But the other caveat is that you have to apply for that service through your independent service coordinator first. So there is a formal process of enrolling in it, which is not insurmountable, but it does, it's just another step. Does that answer your question?
I'm sure it did. And so I'd like to get back, and someone did just ask about this as well online, back to this slide is, Wendy, what is the future of the sheltered workshop program at Countryside, given all the new changes?
So the needle on when we could no longer do piecework has changed many, many times. We've been talking about it for probably the past 4 to 5 years at minimum. That the deadline for cutoff or don't ever do has changed. There have been some areas which have been told don't do anymore. We have made modifications and we have added life enrichment classes, etc. over this time. We've also faced now with the pandemic, our vendors, our contractors have had their own issues. So we had one vendor completely shut down. They just only recently came back to work, and it was basically just their management team. We had another provider that was silent during the whole time we were gone. And the third contractor that we did work with while we were shut down, the volume is so high that at this low rate of return, we aren't able to complete the contract expectation. So while we're still, trying to keep up our licensure and our career counseling and required things for the Department of Labor during this shutdown with very few people back, the reality is that is not going to sustain us, and that is not something that we're going to continue to pursue. Because we're going to be doing differently, because our contractors have had to modify their businesses, we have gone to them and asked for hourly opportunities. We have asked for them to look at that. Lakeside was successful in now converting 2 of their accounts to hourly minimum wage payment for the individuals who are doing those jobs. We are working also with some other hourly vendors. We had someone go out today to tour a site to look at a on-site work unit. So we're actively pursuing those opportunities. Right now, we have shredding that we're doing hourly in-house here at Countryside. We just added that within the past month. So, I mean, we are replacing those work opportunities. We also have our employee development services working on those pre-vocational skills for the career council, or the next move, which is community-based employment and competitive employment. So we have been actively over the past several years making those moves towards having different opportunities.
Thank you, Wendy. Jane, obviously, if anything else comes in that you wanted to have Wendy or Sean address, just of course pop in. And as always, always, our families want to know how they can help, whether it's through financial donations or continuing to follow the safety guidelines or simply staying connected. We appreciate it now more than ever. One thing we do know is that for us to define the future programming at Countryside, what we need from our families is their input and their commitment for their families' intentions. So what our families are intending to do come the new year and mid-year. So Sean, if you could please share the next very important steps that we are taking as an agency to gather that input, and basically why do we need to gather this input? You referenced it earlier. It's going to help us define what the program's going to look like, but could you talk about that a little bit more?
I sure will. You know, during Wendy's comments, I just happened to glance over to the Q&A section. So, you shouldn't, I'm that person who, well, if you hand me the document with the answer in the back, I'm going to flip through. So I do want to say a couple things just in response, because I think it is representing some very strong feelings. One person did question, how could family services get subsidized like that? And I just want to emphasize, again, from federal priorities center around serving kids and families. There's an entitlement. So a child who is found to be abused and neglected and removed from his home, the state has a mandatory obligation to provide services to that individual. So therefore, foster care adoption by mandate is going to receive that. So yes, it is subsidized. And another talked about the catch-22 you're in, and it's no different than us. When folks were told to shelter in place, we had 50% of our workforce that was told come rushing in. And the dilemma that our families are facing, we know that the best option to fight this pandemic as we presently look at it is limit the opportunities for leaving your home and engaging, and making sure that your contacts with others are very limited. But yet this family's saying that we're suggesting that people cross that barrier and come back to the center. And I recognize that's a tough dilemma. We have for the past almost 200 days have brought our kids back to their day school program. without one instance of COVID. I knock on wood. And so we've got a fully operating school program with both teachers and students, of which, unfortunately, a majority of them do not mask, meaning the residents that we're serving. But it tells me that the precautionary measures that we take, Tina, are making a difference. And so to those families who make that choice, what Wendy and the team will assure that everything we can do humanly possible to eliminate or reduce the probability of COVID exposure are what we do. And that's a decision that each person has to make. And I'm not here to threaten them into that. I just want to speak to our reality is if we don't understand their intent, if someone says, as soon as my loved one gets vaccinated, we'll come back, or as soon as you make sure there's a protective barrier in the classroom, I'll come back. We need to better understand both the timing and the conditions. If someone says, I prefer not to come to a larger setting, I like to do something smaller near the home, Wendy and the team need that information so that we can begin to plan for and hopefully put in place those suggestions that they're making. And so I read another question about, we came into this as full partners and now it seems like we're being written off. I feel that. And that's the part, I actually raised that with one of my board members. How sad would that be? That a major part of why we merged was the richness of that community environment and those families could be written off. So our purpose, Tina, even having this discussion tonight, is we're not willfully wanting that outcome, but it becomes that outcome if we don't work together to try and figure out, how do we make this work? How do we make it work? Because serving people is the business that we're in. As Wendy shared, that option of virtual programming is not sustainable. The logic isn't there. You're going to charge me for a labor cost, but pay me for half of it and say I should be happy. State of Illinois, no. And so advocate to make sure that those dollars continue to come in to support. Let us know what your plans are. If it's never to come back, I respect that, but it goes against why we do this. It's not about revenue. It's about changing lives. I know at a personal level, I know how much weight people have gained. I don't do well sheltering in place, so I've been out there. I need that movement. I need that social contact. I need those things to add to quality of life. When I read the note there about one of the families saying, will those things that people value still be there? They're there now. Can we figure out a way that your loved one can still benefit from that without risking it for the future? So that data, Tina, letting us know their intent is vitally important, because that will guide. If I'm telling my board, hold on for 60 more days because there's this critical mass coming, I have real data. Right now, what Wendy and team have given are their best guess. That best guess, you can't go to our CFO and say, let's go another month on our best guess. We need solid information to begin to make more solid decisions about the future of that program.
Thanks, Sean, and I appreciate you referencing that when we had that merger, it was under different circumstances, and we had a very promising mindset. But unfortunately, as you also mentioned, we are one financial bucket, and we've seen agencies like ours, but that are completely and only community day services, they just haven't been able to survive. So the fact that we do have that variety has worked to our benefit, but it doesn't negate the fact that our Countryside program is unfortunately hurting. So with that being said, Wendy, was there anything that you wanted to add to Sean's comments, or would you like me to move on?
I think just that the elements of what we have been and what we always will be are here. And Sean did, state it very appropriately. What do we need? Where do we need to meet you for those needs, for the needs of your participants, for your loved ones? Because that we are prepared to do, and that would, in our service model, we would be able to bring all those elements that everyone loves and expects to any of those locations, whether it's on site, whether it's in a smaller community setting, whether it is virtually. We're prepared to make those changes to meet everyone's new needs.
Thank you, Wendy. And thank you both so much for taking the time to answer all these questions that are on the top of everybody's minds. And as everybody has of course heard the promising news that at least one vaccine and likely another one today has been approved, administered, and endorsed by the FDA and CDC. We are encouraging our staff and our clients to receive the vaccine when it's available. This promising breakthrough signals the best opportunity that we have to end the pandemic. If you have not already received a survey from us regarding your intention for having your loved one vaccinated, you should be receiving that shortly. And that's important for us to know, so we know how we will be able to adjust once we have more people coming back to our programming. So our mission of creating those meaningful opportunities for individuals with disabilities has only been strengthened since the Little City and Countryside merger. We're encouraged not only by the medical breakthroughs in stopping the virus, but encouraged by the unwavering support of our families who know the work that Little City does is important and essential. And as we end, Sean, I'm just going to ask you if you have any closing remarks.
Tina, yes, we care. We respect the choices that the families make. We understand the difficulty, and this, as someone referenced, kind of a catch-22. You can help us by being candid about both your concerns and intentions. I've known of one organization that right now is shutting their doors with the hope of reopening when everything clears up. Others are going different directions by way of who they serve. We have gone into this with the hope and belief that we could come out with the passage of time in a stronger, better position. And that's what I hold out for. And, but we're at a stage now that we have to report back on what is our planned use of the facilities that we operate and who will be served in them. And without knowing where our countryside families are, we can't make a meaningful decision. So I thank all for their participation. I think you'll mention that I saw a question where will all the questions get answered? Any that we haven't addressed tonight, anyone who raises a question, we're going to answer. And so Tina and Jane will field those, and whether or not it's a phone call or a document, I want to make sure that your questions, to the extent possible, are answered. But more importantly, Wendy and I need your ideas. What do you want this system to look like in the future, understanding that it is extremely unlikely. I never say never, but I'll come as close to never as I can on this. The likelihood of, in our immediate future, of 300 people convening to a single area, regardless of size, is very unlikely. And so we know that. What other ways do you see that we can contribute to the meaningfulness of the day of your loved one? And how can we best achieve that? So we don't want them to walk away and say, it's just all is gone. It's gone if we let it go. And I'm not ready to let it go, but I need Wendy, others, we need some help.
Thank you, Sean. Jane, was there anything else that came through that you would like to address?
Yeah, as Sean had mentioned, there are a lot of questions that we will follow up individually, but thank you for all of the questions. There are a couple that a little bit back that were, when we were talking about the, CDS being in the red, and Wendy had imply that we will work with you and what you can manage right now. The question that spurred is, what percentage of CDS needs to show up for it to be viable? Can my loved one show up only 1 day a week? And if enough people show up 1 day a week, does that make a difference? Or is there some level that we have to commit to together? So they wanted to elaborate more on what Wendy was saying, we'll work with you, but they were looking more kind of like, what is that minimum level of threshold that they would have to commit to?
So Wendy, any thoughts on that from your end? Because we raised that question. I asked Wendy and Joanne, the first thing we know, Jane, is that there is a occupancy just based on current CDC guidelines and the rest. So if Wendy has space to safely serve, and again, safety is key. If she can safely serve, for example, 120 people, then that's the occupancy number. But I need to work with our CFO on, given the staff and the number of residents, what is that number that at least breaks even or has the minimal negative impact? And so I don't know that Wendy has that absolute number, but the idea is there. We know it's not going to be 200, and it may not be 120. That's what it can serve. And so if we have people who come in twice a week or 2 hours, I would like to at least see what that profile would look like, and can we make that enough to sustain us over the short haul? It's not a long-term strategy, but it at least is one that keeps the wheels of justice moving in the right direction. Wendy, any thoughts on that?
The challenge of having very limited attendance is that we have to serve, but with respect to ratios and respect to case management, it becomes a trickier operation financially to afford the staff required to do that when you don't know, if your numbers are changing consistently. It is not impossible to serve in that way, but for a very short time. That would not be sustainable for us long term to have someone only come once a month or once a week indefinitely. I can see where, getting your feet wet, which is why we introduced the half-day option for individuals. Some it was for the masking requirement and their tolerance. Others it was because that was the comfort level that the individual or their guardian had. But long term, that half-day option, it does impact, and that one time a week option does impact sustainability.
And I think too, the transportation logistics become a little bit more complex unless that person's being driven back and forth. And one of the hopes that I have, and I know it's shared by Wendy, is that as we come out of this, we create program options that you really hate to miss. There's certain things that the pandemic has stopped me from doing that I don't miss. And when I come out of pandemic, I'm not going to go back to. I hope that the program offerings that we have are things that your loved one wakes up each day really wanting to go to. Our assurance that whatever we provide is going to be safe, is going to be appropriate. And so this is giving us a chance, as Wendy mentioned in her earlier comments, to really build some quality components in the offerings. So can stay tuned on what those things are, but our hope now is that people can at least let us know their intent.
So there was a question just about, what are the logistics about supplying that information? Will there be a survey via email, or will case managers call everyone? Wendy, can you address how we are going to solicit that information from our families?
Certainly. From our initial risk benefit assessments that we did, we have been maintaining contacts. That will definitely be how we're going to approach this post this meeting, because we do need to have that information. We do need to have those statistics, and we have been keeping up between myself, our case management team, and connecting with people. But now we really just need to go forward with, okay, even if you can't lock down a sturdy date, or you're not comfortable saying, or you haven't received medical release, whatever it is, we do want to find out then, how can we meet your needs? How can what are your interests? How do we modify our services for someone who wants to, for now or for the next several months, look at a lesser option? So we just need to have those realistic numbers, and it will most likely be phone calls to connect with everyone, because I find that's the best way to answer questions versus just a static piece of paper. So you would hear from myself, our case management team, a few of our managers to gather that information consistently.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you both very much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. And like Sean said, if we didn't address your specific question, we will make every effort to do so, those that can be answered. You could also submit your questions to our, we have a COVID email address that will pop up on the screen, or call our COVID hotline for any questions you have, and somebody will certainly be sure to get back to you. So everybody, also there is going to be an event, I believe next Tuesday, a virtual Santa, or virtual holiday party, thank you, next Tuesday at 10 a.m. And you can email Teresa Pfeifferich at littlecity.org to RSVP, which will be very fun. So we hope everybody is able to join that event. So once again, thank you everybody for submitting your comments, for tuning in. We know it's a difficult time for you and your loved ones, and we'll certainly come out of this. We keep on saying it, coming out of this stronger, but that is our intention. So everybody, please stay healthy, please stay safe, and happy holidays. We will see you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.